Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the Industry 4.0 podcast focused on the future of manufacturing. This is a conversation, or this is a broadcast where we like to have a conversation about the latest and greatest of things that are happening in manufacturing, looking at things all across the board, and the latest in technology and all the different surrounding pieces. And here today, I'm joined by Jason, and looking forward to having a really deep and fruitful conversation on the topic of cybersecurity, which is perfect for this time of year because it is, of course, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So before we get started here, just a quick who's who. So my name is Ira Sharp, and I'm one of the hosts here in the Industry 4.0 Club and here on the future of manufacturing. And when I'm not here having these conversations, I'm the director of marketing at a company, Phoenix Contact, for all of the automation components. And otherwise, I like to be out here in the community and prompt different types of conversations and explore different areas of the industrial manufacturing space. And joining me here today is Jason, a practitioner in the area of cybersecurity. And Jason, can you give the audience a little bit of who's who you have here on the other line, and then we can dig into the cybersecurity topic.
Sure. Thanks, Ira. Good to see you again today. And my name is Jason Rivera. I lead a cyber physical systems security practice for my organization named Security Risk Advisors. We say cyber physical systems as a kind of a category of OT and XIoT, which would be more of your extended Internet of Things. But a lot of people throw a lot of terms around, so I like to be technically accurate. And OT being OT, that is one of the areas of service underneath the practice that I lead for SRA. So my role is to build services to meet client demands, keep an eye on the market to see what's evolving and emerging. I also do a lot of our staffing, our hiring and training of those individuals to execute services. And then I have the benefit and privilege of being able to talk to clients and getting an understanding of the types of challenges that they're facing and opportunities that we can help them with, obviously. But I find that to be the most beneficial that I have, because then I get to hear it from the horse's mouths. What are you experiencing? What are you doing? What are you trying to do but having trouble with? And what are the big things that you're concerned about? And these are all conversations that I get to have on pretty much a weekly basis. So that's my role. Pleasure to be here, Ira. Thanks for inviting me, and looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that sounds like a laundry list of things that you have going on there. So, you're not just involved in the nitty gritty of exactly what's going on, but kind of the whole ecosystem and, building out your practice and these kind of things. It's good. It's a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I came from the nitty gritty. I came
Yeah.
from execution. I started off in, a SOC analyst role, just eyes on glass and watching different environments. I moved up through a bunch of different positions from that point. And fell in love with OT about 5-6 years ago, and have never looked back. I mean, it's one of those areas. It's a niche in cybersecurity that I identified with so strongly, having a heavy networking background, right? So the world of OT is very much, there's some sort of play there between understanding networking and understanding OT cybersecurity risks. But for the most part, I fell in love with it because it was the first time in executing cybersecurity that I was able to relate extremely well to what I was doing, what I was protecting, my mission, producing this versus, numbers in a formula somewhere. Like, that resonated with me so much that it was the moment in time where I just had that, that eureka for my career. Like, I'm going to do this. This is what I now love and do. So to your point, I've been involved in the nitty gritty. I've been on plant floors. I've been in distribution center. I've done a firewall changeover in a distribution center before. I've handled a lot of different unique components of what that looks like. But now I get to have those wider conversations and those broader conversations with folks.
Yeah, and that's so great. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on here, because you do have a wide scope in which your experience base has been and kind of where you are and where you're going and all these different things. And it's always great, hearing this transition, particularly from the IT over to the OT and this piece, because end up on the concrete side, looking back at the carpeted side, and hopefully not wondering why you got there, and you're positive in where you are, and kind of bringing those worlds together. So thinking about bringing those worlds together, of course, anytime I hear about OT cybersecurity, one of the big questions, or one of the big topics that I always like to discuss, because I know many people have different opinions on even what this is and where it is and how it all works, but the IT OT convergence, what exactly does that mean to you? Because again, I know it means a lot of things to different types of people, and frankly, who owns what when it comes to IT OT convergence?
Yeah, I'll take the first part of that question as the easy part, and then the who owns what, we can save that one. So the IT/OT convergence, it has such a wide range to it. What I focus on is the risk. So from a security side, bringing IT security risk into OT is where I like to strike the best balance, because obviously that's what I do, but you find that there's relatable terms or relatable issues in that convergence. So if you're introducing an IT system into an OT environment, and let's say, foundationally, you don't have a good construct for how the data is going to flow from that IT system to your OT systems. Is it going to be bidirectional data? Is it just reaching in and grabbing data and pulling out? Is it going the other way where it's outbound only? I just touched on 3 small principles, but that in itself is a massive undertaking to flesh out in a way that and to do so in a way that's programmatic, and that you're outlining that risk and understanding that risk and registering that risk, or that you're architecting the solutions to meet the organizational requirements that you have. So you'll find, hopefully, Aaron, a lot of what I do and how I try to proceed, points on cybersecurity is back to organizational, because we can argue technical definitions until we're both asleep or something else, right? But it's a business prerogative to bring IT into the OT world, and it should be a business level agreement between stakeholders as to how to architect and introduce things in a way that keeps the risk level low. And I think that's one of the prevailing factors that I like to make sure I have conversationally or assert into folks who are working on IT/OT convergence, is that you need to just have the right stakeholders together, right? And playing off the business requirements and saying, as a business, we can agree to this, but we can't agree to this. That is a fair statement, and you should say that. And you should make that decision point be the one that you lean on, versus looking outside or external to a bunch of specifications and requirements and 800, 900-page documents to tell you what to do. Those are informative, right? But in order to keep that risk low, you should flesh that out organizationally and as a business unit.
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned the topic of risk, and of course, because, well, I shouldn't say it's funny. I mean, when I really think about it, the idea of risk, that's a term that personally I use a lot, and I'm not in the cybersecurity, directly in the cybersecurity space, right? I'm actually in product marketing, right? And we talk about risk even in different types of endeavors we're doing from a marketing perspective. And I think it's a good way to analyze a lot of things, because when you look at things in not just what benefit can you get or what thing can I comply with, but what if I don't do this? What risks can happen? What are the things that I won't get because of X, Y, Z? It's just kind of a good overarching way to look at things. Maybe it's a little bit of a pessimistic way if you really think about it, because you're looking at things you won't get. But I think it's realistic, because you do need to take considerations. You do need to make sacrifices in some ways to make sure that you are complying with your own standards, or trying to keep yourself safer.
Yeah, I agree. I think a couple of things. There's somebody said it to me once, and I agree with this. OT cybersecurity risk is business risk. So keep that in mind, right? On the flip side of this, though, I think risk is something that cybersecurity risk is something that we're being forced to reckon with more than anything else. Because on the contrary side to risk and risk mitigation, risk acceptance, all these things, is secure by design. If products are designed well, built well, and with cybersecurity part of that design process, then the risk is lower on the tail end. The risk is lower or non-existent from an end user or a purchaser perspective, a buyer perspective, and therefore we don't have to worry so much about risk. So if we can get to a point where we're designing products with the right level of cybersecurity built into that process, it thus reduces that risk need at a later point in time. I think that at some point we'll get there across verticals in the industry, but right now it's still a matter of learning a lot, learning about different vulnerabilities, learning about how better to introduce secure by design principles, both as, for OEMs, for vendors, and for, again, on the tail end of end users, understanding those design principles. When it comes down to the risk factors, though, like that's something that it's its whole separate beast. I've worked with many organizations who handle risk entirely different organization by organization. It's something that we can bite into, but there are a lot of different tentacles that get involved.
So when you talk about secure by design, does that mean you buy a product that says secure by design and you're done? You don't have to worry about anything else?
Never.
Okay.
You know that.
I mean, I knew that was the answer, but I had to ask the question, just in case.
Well, I'll challenge you back then. In 15 or 20 years from now, if I buy a product that says secure by design, I might trust that, because we're going to, hopefully, I'm an optimist. I choose to be an optimist, right? Because I think it is a choice in a lot of ways. So I'm going to choose to believe that as an industry, we're going to learn a lot from secure by design principles that are being developed and pushed now. And we're going to be able to push all this risk stuff to the side, because our cybersecurity risk is going to be much lower. I'm going to choose to see that evolution. But in 5 years from now, to your point, no, I'm not going to trust that label. And I'm going to know that there's probably a degree of maturity in that product in recognizing secure by design principles. But even, I'm sure partly why you asked the question, it's not just in the product, it's in the implementation of the product. Right. So whatever you buy or that you're making, et cetera, if you're an end user, it's where you put it in. How are you putting it on the network? Did you leave it on a flat network and it's a secured by design product? Well, congratulations, it's now insecure by implementation.
So there was a question in the chat there, what does secure by design look like? And I think you answered it there. So it's not just the product, right? It's the architecture. Is there anything you want to add to that? Like just for context?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that go into that. There's, if you point, this is non-OT, but I think we can probably just extend a little bit. In the world of medical devices, for example, the FDA put out a bunch of requirements that says, if you're going to manufacture medical devices, you need to do threat modeling and testing and all these different things as part of that product development process. If you look at something like threat modeling, that basically you're taking all the components of the device and you're teasing out all the different possibilities or different options, different ways that cybersecurity, threat actors, or tactics, et cetera, can make its way to that product. So you're teasing that out in the product design phase. I think there's something to learn from that when you come back to secure by design, which is that in that product design phase, you have a cybersecurity person who's able to elaborate on the risks that may present themselves in that product during the design phase. Right? So I see that to me really represents what security by design is. It's teasing out the different potential cybersecurity risks in the product before it's produced and before it's manufactured and released at the most general level.
And are there clear signs that say, hey, this is secure by design? Like is there a certification? Is there a logo? Is it just, you're hoping the manufacturer is telling you the right thing? What does that look like?
Yeah, there are going to be labels for medical devices. I'm not sure that it's going to be like a secure by design label. I haven't been following that as of lately, but I know they plan to do label. I'm not seeing it so much on the OT side though. And I think there's still a lot of discussion and debate, and I hear from OEMs saying that what they're looking for is for customers to push the precedent of more secure products or more cybersecurity in the products. And I think that, eventually we'll get to the same stage, hopefully, as medical devices with the stamp or the badge or whatever it is. But I don't think we're anywhere near that yet. I think we have a pretty decent, timeline before we get to that point of being able to buy something, commercially at a manufacturing level that says, yeah, you can trust this thing.
Yeah, it makes sense. So we have this this IT/OT convergence, right? And we have this idea of, really, building things out and and, and looking at everything holistically. Um, Overall, one of the things that you had mentioned is really evaluating the system. What does that look like? What does testing look like? How do you know your system is secure from an IT perspective? Maybe looking at OT or some things that the OT department needs to consider when they're going back to the IT side of things.
I mean, firstly, we can call it a duck. You never know you're secure, and you're probably never actually secure. Threat actors evolve, their tactics evolve, technology grows and changes, evolves. Like this is a never-ending battle. It's. I hate to just, call it cliche, but it's a journey. It's not a destination, and that is the reality. I think in a lot of these ways. For convergence itself, when I think about what to do, to me, it's around the data flows, right? How the IT and OT are going to be connected, how they're going to be implemented, and what exactly are you introducing? What exactly are we converging? Is it better business intelligence? Is it better real-time data analytics? All these different systems that live in the IT world that businesses are, I wouldn't say forced to introduce into this world, but in order to stay competitive, you have to pull better analytics and data out of an operational technology environment. So to me, it really comes down to the type of system, the data that's going to be exchanged, if at all, how that data and those systems are going to connect. And then ultimately, like, how are you going to continue monitoring and evolving that architecture? Because nothing we do is point in time. How many times have you integrated or implemented a system and been able to say, yeah, that's a set and forget? Never. Systems change. Networks are dynamic. They live and breathe. Systems go through updates, or they get extended beyond their initial intention and purpose, and now have a new role to support the business. That's natural, and that's something we all have to account for. But really, to me, it comes down to understanding the impacts and the role of those systems, and then looking at the implementation and the architecture of them, and being able to say, okay, this is unencrypted network traffic. This is using services that I just checked, and there's a couple thousand vulnerabilities. We need to come up with a compensatory control in order to handle that, right? It's basically having those discussions and teasing out the different scenarios that might affect your business.
And so, affecting the business is I would probably say the big why you would even consider this IT/OT convergence, because you have to implement these security practices on top of the OT system. Now, you mentioned a couple of things like the vulnerabilities, and then when you think about IT, or when I think about IT, right, and I think about security there, patch management, and these topics are all very common. But I believe there's differences between how that's treated in the IT space versus the OT space, because if there's a big vulnerability, I know my IT department will tell me on my iPhone, hey, update to the new 17.11 operating system tonight, and they'll force me to do it or whatever. But when you're thinking about a production machine, particularly in a process environment that's continuous process, it could be, even though it's dangerous to have the vulnerability in your controller, it could be exponentially more dangerous to just push an update randomly, right? So, what does that look like from your point of view? Am I crazy in my thoughts? Is that a right mindset? How do you look at that?
No, you're not crazy in your thoughts. That is one of the penultimate topics in the world of OT cybersecurity, because many, to your point, before we just got started here, I got an update from my laptop saying your organization requires you to do an update. And I said,
it always happens right before you're going to do a live stream. Like, hey, push this button. It'll take 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes, right. To push the button. Yeah. But so that is IT, to your point. That is IT, vulnerability and patching. And that is common. There's Patch Tuesdays, there's MDM solutions for your mobile phones. There's all these things. Patching OT is entirely different, if at all. There are standard considerations. Do you have shutdown times to afford for that machine to get patched in the first place? Is the business willing to allow for that maintenance window if everything goes well, in order to afford for that loss of productivity or distribution or whatever it's going to be? Those two things are on their own take, I don't know, could take weeks just to plan out. And then that's assuming that you got approvals. Back to the risk itself, though, just because a system has a vulnerability doesn't mean that that vulnerability applied to an operational technology environment is fitting the vulnerability ranking or scoring that it got. Right? So you apply that, you say, okay, this has a score of this. In my world, if that vulnerability were to get owned or to actually get exploited, then I could say that machine, I'm not really concerned about it. If it goes down, it goes down, and that's fine. The reality of that is pretty minimal, but that's the scenario you end up working through when you're faced with this stuff in the operational technology world. What's the likelihood? What's the application? What's the reality of that occurring? And furthermore, do I have compensatory controls that I can lean on instead to help prevent that from occurring?
Right.
There are just so many things to consider that, it's a heated debate and discussion topic. It's also a point of contention for a lot of OT folks when they get notifications from IT cybersecurity or global security, or they see a lot of chatter about threats and all these things that are occurring in the industry, when they say, well, what am I supposed to do about it? I don't need more of that. I need better ways of producing and distributing and being safe without necessarily coming in and having someone tell me I need to go patch this system. So it's a tough one, and it's there's no clear answer. There are a couple different mechanisms out there. If you're not familiar with something called SSVC, that's stakeholder specific vulnerability categorization, that's a principle that I think came out of Carnegie Mellon, I want to say. And basically, it's like this. It's a structure for getting out of standard vulnerability scoring and having your own stakeholder specific version of that, so you can pragmatically and tangibly decide whether something is worth it for you to bring down a patch or not.
Right.
In the world of OT, there are different mechanisms like that I see get used.
So I mean, I think that's one of the big things. Safety and security, I think, go hand in hand in this regard, because it is not black and white. It is many different shades, and it just depends on where you are with it. It's, how yes, there is something that could potentially be a problem there. How big of a risk really is that? Is the vulnerability, only really exploitable via physical connection? If it is, and it's in the middle of my facility and a locked cabinet in a safe and secure area, it's still vulnerable. It could still have an issue, but is that the thing you need to necessarily turn off the process tomorrow? Maybe not, right?
Exactly.
And if it's something that, could easily be exploited in a great way and it could spread throughout and it's a major threat, okay, well, that's different, but you still have to treat it with, kind of kid gloves and really, and going all the way back, and maybe we can touch on some organizational stuff here too, is you had mentioned early on about, and I think this is so critical, is not looking at it as something as like just cybersecurity, but looking at it from the overall business perspective and how it affects the overall business itself and the agreed procedures on how things will be addressed. So organizationally, how do people deal on the OT side of things with cybersecurity? Like what do things look like? How is the organization, really built up around OT security?
Messy. It's just pretty messy. I want to say.
Very clear. That's very clear. Wait, not clear.
But it varies. I've had, even conversations recently with an organization that has a global OT cybersecurity lead, right? And even that in itself is unique. But then that same organization in person has dedicated OT cybersecurity folks at each of their plants, which is incredibly unheard of, and so smart and so good, because what you're basically doing is you're bridging an organizational, not a gap or not a contention point, but you're taking two different sides of the game and putting them together in one spot. So taking an OT cybersecurity person and putting them with the plant says, build a relationship, build trust, understand the different worlds that we're living in, establish lines of communication. Let me understand your world before, as a cybersecurity person, before I go waving my finger and say, hey, you got to do these things, or here's a new tool to deploy into your OT environment. No, start with understanding what their world looks like. Start with understanding that safety is paramount to them, more so than confidentiality, right? And these are the contrasts that we need to start to navigate organizationally. To that end, um, creating common rational, decisions between both, assumingly we're talking about an IT security, cybersecurity, a global IT security organization and OT, having them be establish clear lines of expectations, giving OT folks a seat at the table in some of those decisions, giving OT folks the tools that your global IT cybersecurity team or organization might be deploying. These are all things that, like, I think a lot of organizations are starting to get more familiar with, because I can't tell you how many clients just in the past month maybe I've talked to that say, I can't even get a conversation going with the plants. And yeah, there's probably something to learn from that. Maybe you did the compliance thing, you banged them over the head with a bunch of IT compliance stuff, and they said, no way, thanks, get out of here. I've got a job to do. Or it just be that they're too low, they don't have enough resource, they don't have bandwidth. And I think last point there, which is probably even one of the bigger ones, is is it in, for an OT person, is it in their remit to really work on cybersecurity issues? We're talking a lot with automation engineering folks, and their job is to produce. Their job is to maintain the uptime, reliability of all these systems. If they deviate from that and spend 10 hours, 5 hours here, and all of a sudden miss some of their own goals and marks from their own automation engineering world, how are they going to be rewarded for that? They're probably not. So that's, on a tactical level, that's one thing. But if you zoom out on a higher level, that means the organizations need to embed cybersecurity directives and goals into the world of OT personnel if we're going to expect to make some change, and incentivize them and encourage them to be willing to take part and have these conversations. But it also means that they're going to deviate away from the things that they're already responsible for doing.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. It almost seems like, almost an exact contrast from even what you just said, where it's hard because you said you need these goals to try to meet, right? And that sounds like a top-down approach. But in the same time, you're like, you have to watch that top-down, because you don't want to get this resistant at the OT level that's just trying to push it up and saying, no, we can't do that. So you need this relationship at a local level at the exact same time, actually probably ahead of it. So you need the top down because you need guidelines and rules is what I'm hearing. Correct me if I'm wrong. But without that relationship at that factory level to truly understand that this is where you want to be, it's that's a hard trick. That's a balancing act.
It is, and now's the time to figure out how to balance it. I think that the industry at large is starting to, as more organizations start to realize that OT is not the thing to forget about or ignore, or that even if there was a willingness to do so, there are actually more tools out there now as well. So there's an evolution in the market, in the industry for this stuff, which means that there are more tools at the fingertips and at the disposal of organizations to start to introduce initiatives into the world of OT, where previously it was, yeah, we have OT, but it's not my coverage, or I don't know what to do about it, they won't talk to me. So now there are a lot of bridging points that we can start to lean on. There are more guidance, there's more guidance, there's more documentation, there's more frameworks, there's more standards, there's more tools. So we can start to have those conversations. To your point though, I think what we need to have, the conversation needs to be at a level of executive, so that the anyone from an IT cybersecurity part of the organization and the OT organization, cybersecurity or not, they are together as a steering committee to be able to navigate the demands and ultimately execute on the vision that the organization has to better secure their manufacturing. Like that has to happen. It's not as if OT folks don't know or watch the news or read of ransomware and other things. They just don't know what to do. So let's put all this other stuff aside and sit down and have conversations.
Well, and you said something earlier too. It comes down to, I can't remember exact word you used, but I would say, the objectives of the group, right? If the
Mhm.
objectives of the group do not include elements of things like cybersecurity in the whole scope of things, then it's going to be in direct opposition to maybe just getting better yield out of your machine or cranking more products out. Like there needs to be an element of in a plan or a KPI or whatever else that
Yep.
you are meeting certain levels or you're meeting these particular parameters. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from your conversation here. It's a little bit of what I think I've heard. Is that correct?
Yeah, very much so. I think there needs to be a program. If you have no controls, if you have no evolution of your OT cybersecurity today, there needs to be a programmatic start to it. And program doesn't have to be some massive thing. It could just be a starting point.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at tools, but I don't know if I need tools yet because I have no framework for OT security that both the global security and the sites have agreed on.
Yeah.
Right? Or like I don't know what kind of assets out there. Maybe I just go with a tool that's going to do asset discovery and it's going to reveal some of that risk and gets me better visibility. That could be a program start too. But to your point, establishing a program means that you're creating a conversation between multiple folks and multiple business units. You're able to fund programs to the best that you're able to, but you're also able to establish those KPIs. And maybe from the program itself, you can translate those KPIs into more of an organizational directive after that. Because remember, I don't think programs should be forever. They should be start points. You should have a 1 or 2 or 3 year and then wind down and build organizational capabilities from that point.
So you mentioned tools a few times, and there's a couple of questions here I'd like to explore. And
Sure.
one of the questions here is about some best practices. And I think this is always a good question because we've really looked at a number of different things. So when you're looking at overall with whether your tools or systems or processes or organization, what are some of the best practices you see in securing OT systems? Particularly here, they're looking at the legacy systems, which I think is
Mhm.
also important because sometimes we all know that in the manufacturing sector, that things tend to hang around for a little while, maybe a little bit longer than they do in the IT sector. I'm just speculating here,
You're
but
speculating that maybe OT was designed for like a 50-year lifespan, not 3. Yeah.
hypothetically, yes, hypothetically, if this is the case.
Yeah.
But seriously though, there are some things that are very long in the tooth, right? They've been operating for a very long period of time. It's a good question. Like, how do you deal with this? What are some of the best practices in general with this type of legacy equipment, or really any equipment?
I'll start with the big bang right out of the gate. The very first, the best thing you could do, segment the networks. And it is so tough. It is not easy. But I think there's what you get from that is there are so many benefits that trickle down. The network segmentation is one of the things that directly applies to what I think defensive in-depth strategy. Right. So like you can use it as a compensatory control for legacy systems, but by segmenting your networks, you're creating multiple boundaries that ransomware or an attack of any type have to then hop through to get to that system. And as long as the systems are networked, VLANs have existed literally since the 70s. That capability for networks to be segmented and using virtual LANs has existed for so long. But the reason I think that we have so many flat networks is because it's so difficult to disrupt the network or disrupt the operation, and even having the necessary technology to build segmentation properly is definitely a prerequisite. But I think that's one of the best ways to secure legacy systems, because then you're not trying to figure out the unique proprietary protocol or proprietary software, proprietary anything else that one legacy system is running. Is that worth your time? Instead, step back, look at the environment that it is in, and introduce prevention, detection, whatever you want to call it, whatever level of maturity you're at, around that system itself. And now we're getting to the point of discussing compensatory controls, which I think are incredibly relevant for these environments. But to answer your question directly, segmentation and segmenting that system off certain enclaves of the network, I think is one of the best things you can do.
And just to make sure everybody's on the same page, can you define what network segmentation actually is?
Sure. So you have an environment of a bunch of different systems. And let's say I'll define it through contrast. All those systems are on the same network, the same /23.
They can all see each other.
They can all see each other. They can all talk to each other. And let's just take that a step further and say that network, that /23, I'm using subnetting terms, but that network of however 100 many IP addresses are available in that pool and get assigned to those systems, that is what's called a flat network. There are no enclaves. You have not separated off systems by role or by physical location or anything. The biggest challenge with that model is a few things. Firstly, I worked a case in probably 2018, Locky ransomware, one of the first ransomwares that came out really and hit enterprises.
OG, that's an OG
ransomware. It's an OG ransomware, and it happened because a user in California in accounting clicked, did the same thing that we do as human beings. We're all, there's a reason since humans are still the number one attack vector for cybersecurity, is that we can be dependent on to do silly things. So a user clicked something, and then about 8 hours later, a production line in Ireland went down. And that is of a few different things, but more importantly, flat networking. Why does communication from a user in accounting in California, why can that PC communicate or impact or even reach a production system in Ireland? So that is what's called a flat network, and that is bad in terms of cybersecurity. Not even I'm just going to sugarcoat it and say like, hey, you don't want to do that, but that's just bad. That lacks defense in depth. So when we say segmentation, Ira, it's around creating enclaves so that at a boundary level of the network, that person in California cannot even contact or make network connection or have any type of protocol-based even communication with a system that they shouldn't.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the reason people make flat networks is because they're easy. Because once you do it and you have this here and you need to talk it there, you don't need to worry about anything else. You just, hey, call them up. You're good to go. You don't have to worry about anything else.
You put something on the system, you're like, hey, let me try this out. I'm going to test it and figure out all the bugs. And then the next thing, years pass and you say, oh, wow, I never segmented that off. Mm-hmm. You should probably do that.
I try to run a pretty tight ship here with my IoT devices and how I segment my network and things. And I typically do a really good job until I add that new device and it doesn't work. And I'm like, we'll just give it God access. And then I'm like, exactly. Oh no, I forgot to turn it off. So we're all guilty of it from time to time.
Yeah.
So,
but even to that point, one more quick thing on there. Yeah. We can point to technology. We can point to segmenting and say, hey, principally that makes sense, but you should be doing so in accordance to a design. Or what I very often call a framework, which is to say, hey, I looked at my framework. It says that a system of this role is allowed network communication up to this other level. If you're familiar with Purdue reference architecture, right, to establish levels and data flows and say, hey, we adhere to this. I know that a level 0 or a level 1 system may have the ability to communicate up through level 3.5 and up to level 4 and 5 systems. So therefore, I know that if that is the case of my system, then I need to do these 3 things. But you have something to look at. You have something to reference. If you're a person doing implementation of any systems in your environment, sometimes the only reference you have is Google or ISA 62443 or something else where you're saying like, okay, what are the boundaries? How am I supposed to do this? Well, organizations should have that structure. They should build blueprints and documents and frameworks and other documents that align both best practice of implementing solutions so that cybersecurity is adhered to. And it's not policy, it's a reference.
Right. So this is fantastic. So there's another question here, and I think this is a really good one, particularly because one of the ways we started off was really talking about the business aspects of things and kind of reaching a higher level. And I think this is a high level question that a lot of companies have on their mind, and it's from the chat. So, what percentage of an organization's budget should be allocated to cybersecurity?
Ooh.
So I'm sure it's a very clear number, right? But what do you think? What percentage of a budget should be allocated to cybersecurity?
Well, you're asking a cybersecurity person, so I'm going to say 100. That's tough. I don't even know that I'd be able to answer that question without knowing the organization itself. I think Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I do think that you need to, when budgeting, you need to factor in what is your risk at a business level. So if your business is in producing a thing or these things, right? So then you know that the things are what make all of your money and drive all of your revenue, and really that's your brand. That's that's the thing that's leading to all of your personnel and all your decisions. Then I'd say that you need to invest heavily on securing that thing and the production of that thing. Not to be Captain Obvious, but I think you need to play out pragmatically what level of risk you have as an organization. I work with one organization who doesn't make anything; they distribute everything, which means that their investment is less around the product and more just around the distribution machinery and devices and systems. And those also don't need to necessarily be manned by human beings. There are a lot of robots. There are a lot of different systems that function fairly autonomously. So for them, I think that almost their budget can be a little bit lower because they have, while it's there for their risk, the risk presents itself to the business if something was to happen to that distribution, those systems. But they in themselves, like they're not making anything. They could just get more stock and get more inventory, replenish that if something were to go down, or shift inventory from one site to another. Right. So that's one example of how I might look at that budget and say maybe it doesn't need to be as significant as if all of our eggs were in one basket and our entire business relied on producing this one thing. I don't have a better answer other than have those discussions internally and as an organization, but understand your risk, what your risk looks like as a business.
It makes sense. It makes sense. And in your world and what you do, in helping companies with cybersecurity. So I'm assuming budget comes up, from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
and is it they're looking to get an idea of what their budget should be is when they're contacting you, or do they already have something in mind and you're like, oh no, we're way under budget, or no, you're not budgeting enough, or what is it typically?
It's a mixed bag. Yeah.
It's a mixed bag. Okay.
So as a trusted advisor, I like to be. I want to be able to have conversations with people before they have budget, because I want to lend some experience. I want to lend some expertise, give some guidance on how you can create the right levels of budgeting, because there are many different issues affecting organizations on a cybersecurity basis today. So I want to be able to have those conversations early. They also happen later point in time when someone says, I have budgeted for testing, I have budgeted for controls, I have budgeted for some other technology spend. And those are good conversations too, but I also interrogate those decisions to say, are you making these decisions based on what you saw, or what you caught some trendy line and somewhere and you said like, oh, I have to have this? Or did you actually build out the requirements and do the diligence required to make that decision? And I find less organizations do that latter part today, because I think everyone's so pressured to show results, or pressured to move the needle in some way, that they start to skip those diligence steps. Then you bought a tool, and maybe it's worth every single penny, or maybe there was a lot of promises there that aren't being met. And now you have to look back and say, why did I make that decision? So I'd say anything on the budgeting level should happen not fast, not quick, and it shouldn't be rushed. And you should try to cover as much area as possible in order to get all the right considerations in from anyone who's maybe involved either in an incident or an implementation of any systems. It's a tough one, but I think that there's something to be said for doing it the right way and planning and having a lot of conversations up front. And even if you end up with a super high dollar amount, walk it down.
Yeah.
Don't just go in low. Like you go as high as you can and then walk it down if you need to, versus like just launching off with a low number and expecting everything to go well.
Gotcha. So, looking at all this then, and maybe shifting back a little bit, because I think we got off on a little bit of a tangent here, which I think has been fantastic. But looking at the overall, or from an organizational perspective, in what's involved in this, from this OT standpoint, who exactly, who owns what, and is there anything else that we should really consider there from an organizational perspective?
Oh, you mean I didn't answer that question after the first time you asked it?
No.
Okay. All right. No, that's a tough one. I'll put it this way. I don't think I think it needs to be blended. I do think that the risk is, if it was to get realized one day, is going to be all hands on deck. And I almost think that you should build ownership accordance with all hands on deck. Start with who's going to need to be involved in an incident. Is it your plant manager? Is it the plant IT lead? Is the head of automation, head of engineering? If those are the people who are going to need to be involved in an incident, then those are the ones who should have some level of ownership along with your security function, your security business unit. Because they're the ones who are going to have to work together in the event that something was to take place. That I don't think a lot of those constructs really exist today, though. So it is emerging, it is evolving, it is something that I think does require a degree of creativity in how you're balancing it out. But it can't be siloed. It can't be, whatever is going to happen here can't happen solely from an IT security organization, which, let's face it, a lot of organizations already have IT, so they have an IT security function. And then someone says, hey, you want to take on OT, or you have to take on OT, and they're like, cool, I'll keep doing what I do. Don't do that. You have to create that unified team. You have to extend your knowledge to them and give them an opportunity to extend their knowledge back to you, and then create those almost dotted line, if you will, at the very least. If you're able to, like the one organization I mentioned up front, if you're able to actually staff out your team to work with plants, then that creates a better dynamic and a better organizational structure, I would say. But who owns it is really, it's tough to nail down. I think it just has to be shared for the foreseeable future.
Gotcha. So it's a shared responsibility. It goes all the way back full circle to what we were talking about. I feel like all these roads lead back to the beginning. So it's don't have everything be in a flat network. Segment things out. Do your best practices there. Have it be shared ownership, but there needs to be an element of hierarchy and responsibility that comes along with it. Make sure you have enough budget to get what you need done. These are all the core aspects of what I'm taking from this. Now, looking at that, so there are some guidelines that are out there in the market as far as how you can do things. You mentioned the Purdue model. Of course, that's an architecture. When it comes specifically to security or cybersecurity, the things that come to my mind, and we only have a little bit of time, so I know this is kind of a rough question to ask here towards the end, but there's two big organizations, the NIST and the ISA topic, right? As far as from an architecture perspective, like if you're someone that's looking at this topic holistically, is there a difference between them when you consider what are these different organizations? What should they mean to you in the area of cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's a good one. As far as so NIST being NIST is primarily a US based entity. Right? Let's just start there. And they for OT they have released special publication, and they actually just released the latest revision for OT that I think is a great supplement to any program. On the other side, there's ISA 62443, which is kind of a different flavor in a lot of ways. So it has a lot of different security standards and things that should be done at a system and component level. It'll tell you, it breaks down, don't allow these services to be running if they're not unused. So there is a very low level of guidance that comes along with 62443. I'll just pause it and also say that it's 900 pages. So it's one of those.
Don't worry, I put in the ChatGPT. It spit out the summary. Good to go.
Yeah. Count your hallucinations now. Yeah. So to answer that question, I think it's really a matter of what and how, first and foremost. What are you trying to accomplish? And then how are you going to accomplish that? So for regulated industries or more regulated industries, I'd say that 62443 is something that might be a little bit more a better foundation, because even if you're not doing everything that it says, you're adhering to the guidelines of 62443. And if you're facing regulatory pressures or have compliance that you need to do, there's nothing wrong with standing on 62443's head in order to do that. I think NIST has a different precedent. I see if you're trying to build a program and you need to have a program have a cross reference point, and you want to do it according to like a framework, then NIST has a lot more room for leveraging certain aspects of that program. So there's actually there's a framework that comes with NIST that allows you to ultimately, what I would say, do a gap assessment. You can say, hey, do I have control X? Do I not? And you can reference all that stuff back to NIST's cybersecurity framework. Whereas 62443 isn't a framework; it is a set of standards, right? So that in itself means you have two entirely different principles of guidances by organizations, and that's why I point back to what and how. Like, what are you trying to accomplish, and then how do you plan to do it? If you're gonna extend IT security business unit people, whatever, into performing this assessment, then stick with NIST because they probably know NIST already anyway. But if you're going to have pure OT security folks and you're really trying to solve some low-level OT security issues, then go on 62443 because it's written in OT people's language. It's comprehensible in the world of process automation and all these different aspects of that OT world. So it's more relatable to them. So it comes back to, again, I think, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to foundationally solve for things that you might face on a regulatory level, or that you have mission critical, human safety potentials where, you're in chemical or other sectors where an accident there goes, that could mean loss of lives, to I'm not doing that. I'm producing widgets and I'm extending IT and OT together and I'm building something collaborative. Then you want to go the NIST way. There are a lot of different ways to carve that up, but at the simplest level, I think that's one way to look at it is they're both good. One is more comprehensive in OT than the other, but even the one that's not comprehensive allows for a lot more room to do with, and you can extend it beyond its original purposes.
Okay. Well, good. Well, thank you for that high level overview there. I think it's a good summary, and it provides some guidance too, from particularly for who should be looking at what and why. As we near the end of time here, are there any topics that you wanted to make sure we covered that we missed throughout this conversation in particular?
Not on a topic level, but on a subtopic level. I want to encourage, if there's anyone who listened in and anyone involved in this, to have good conversations between IT and OT cybersecurity folks. I think we need to do more to understand each other and the initiatives and factors that drive our day to day. I said it a little while ago, but I don't think there's any person at a plant level who isn't at least aware of cybersecurity risks, right? But it doesn't mean that we, as IT security, come banging on their door trying to deploy solutions that don't work in their environment. I think we need to afford at an organizational level more conversations to occur, and understanding the different drivers and requirements for both of those worlds to create better outcomes and to better unify all of our resources and our efforts so that they are more successful. Build the relationships.
Yeah, relationships seem to be paramount because nobody loves just being told what to do. You got to have this clear expectation of, working for the greater good. How are you going to move this thing forward? Why? The why behind the what. That's definitely that's a massive leadership topic. If you listen to really anybody when you're talking about a leadership perspective, it's not just saying do this. It's why are we doing this, and how does this affect the bigger picture? And I do think you're right. You definitely are right. The sense of cybersecurity today is way different than it was 10 years ago. I've been in the business for the whole automation business now for 18 years. And I remember when I first came into the industry and I was focusing on wireless communications, and I was trying to convince people that wireless was safe and you could communicate information from point A to point B reliably using this technology. And today, that's accepted, and the whole idea of, and we're communicating things via Ethernet or whatever else it may be, and there are going to eventually be risks involved with that. There's lots of advantages, which is why we move this direction, but there are risks to that. And you need to consider that. And you need to be able to plan if something happens or when something happens, how are you going to deal with this?
Yeah. Because not all risk is there should really be even incorporated. Some risk is, conceptual. Sometimes you have to try to figure out, is it worth it to make that case for proactively triage and remediating risks, right? Or is it better to wait for something to happen and then have to deal with it? There's an argument for both sides of that. And it's but back to the point, just have the conversations.
Right. So there's a lot that I took away from this conversation. Here's a couple of the tidbits that I had kind of noted down here. Number one, conversations, relationships. This is going to be key. And with it all, it comes down to really having a clear mission and a sense of how you're going to approach this topic.
Correct.
And then you need to have a clear definition of what IT/OT convergence really means to your organization, because clearly it can't be widely defined for everybody, black and white. It needs to be defined for you and how you're doing things. And then ultimately, risk is inherent to networks. What are you going to do to mitigate the risk and to really work for or towards it, to really develop this secure by design type of principle?
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the conversation here, it wasn't clear. It wasn't this, that, or the other thing. It's really a, hey, you implement it and then you start this journey. And the journey is, kind of getting to the point where you're going to execute on things. And then once you've done it, you're not done. It's not a set it and forget it. It's about carrying it on. And it's not, I think you said it's a journey. It's not a destination. And I don't think truer words have ever been said about the topic of cybersecurity. So
Mm-hmm.
it's so key.
Yeah.
Need to plan out things and have an idea of how you're going to be able to update things, and then managing the overall system architecture and how all this plays together. And then this network segmentation topic, I think, was key, because there are a lot of networks out there that I know are very flat, and they're done that way because people don't necessarily know better. They plug things together, they get them to work. And segmentation is one of your greatest defenses.
Yeah.
And then the budgeting topic. This is all the technical stuff. Or I guess it's more of the logistics, the personnel, how you're going to deal with it, then the technical pieces, and then how you're going to pay for it. And it's not a clear this, that, or the other thing type of budget. You got to really figure out what your risk tolerance is and how much that means to you organizationally, and define it appropriately.
Yeah.
Those are some of the big things that I took away from this conversation. Was there anything that I missed that you wanted to make sure that you pointed out?
No, but I'll play off your last point. Start somewhere. If you don't have maturity or OT security, cybersecurity, or even general cybersecurity capabilities today, start somewhere. Just start with something and use that as your lightning rod to evolve and mature your capabilities at a later point in time. But start with something, a tool, a segment, an enclave of systems at a site. Do something. You're going to learn from that, and that's the biggest thing to keep in mind. But evolve over time.
Yeah, and I think I love that. I love that topic, and as I've had different conversations, and I have different conversations with different people than you do on a regular basis, but I call it the head in the sand. Like, that only works for so long, and then you realize it doesn't work at all. Like, you definitely need to start somewhere. You need to start investigating. You need to look at it, because it's an important topic, and eventually things will happen. So what are you going to do when it does? How are you going to react?
Yeah, sometimes you make that decision to allow for that thing to happen and then react, because hey, that's when the wallets usually open up.
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
All right, Jason. Well, I think that's a good place to leave off here. I thank you for a wonderful conversation. Can you give everybody an idea of how they can reach out to you or contact you if they want to get more information about you or your company?
Yeah, sure. Pretty easy. Jason.Rivera@sra.io. If anyone's interested, I'm always open to having conversations. Doesn't have to be commercial end of it at all. I'm interested in hearing what people are doing or not doing. We have a lot of good partnerships that we form. There are a lot of different ways to move the needle on this topic. So any and all of them is what I'm in for. And please feel free to reach out.
Awesome, Jason. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Truly do appreciate it. And for everybody out there watching, hope you have a great day. Thanks.